all for coming. I want to introduce the team here, the BookNews group. This is Matthew, and then I'm Sara and Jake and Allie. So I've divided this into themes so that people like that, and then when we talk, it sort of flows better. I'm going to start. We're starting with what's past as prologue, because uh, these all deal with some level of historical, but they're family dramas and in one way or another. And so the first book is Old God's Time by Sebastian Barry. You know, each year I try to read one or two from the Booker list, and Old God's Time was one of them. I had never read. It's the first one on the. Yeah. Yeah, and I never read him, and decided to. This is he's an award-winning writer. I'm just going to read the introduction that I wrote. The Irish Times said that one of Sebastian Barry's extraordinary gifts as a writer is his boundless capacity for empathy, for inhabiting the skin, nerves, and mouths of characters the river of history tends to wash away, unquote. He was born in Dublin in 1955. He's the author of 8 previous novels, as well as numerous plays, and he also writes poetry. He is the first novelist to twice win the Costa Book of the Year Award for Days Without End in the Secret Scripture. He has twice been longlisted for the Booker Prize for A Long, Long Way and Cannon's Side. Last but not least, he was laureate for Irish fiction from 2018 to 2021, and he lives in County Wicklow, south of Dublin, and known for the Wicklow Mountains and the Irish Sea coastline. Old God's Time is Barry's 11th novel, and it too has been longlisted for the 2023 Booker Prize. This book is both a murder investigation and a kind of stream of consciousness novel about the impacts of trauma on memory. The main protagonist and narrator is Tom. I'll let people come in. Hi. Have a seat. Please don't be shy. Just help yourself to the treats I've put out there. So anyway, the main character is Tom Kettle, and we're hearing the story through his words. He's a retired policeman, and he lives along the Irish coast in a lean-to attached to a Victorian castle. He's, in quotes, the orphan of his former happiness. He's had a crushing set of personal losses. He's lost both his wife and his 2 children. But you don't know that initially. You think he's seeing ghosts, but later you realize this is his way of coping and not being alone. And he's happy being retired and living alone, and he likes looking out at the shore and the cormorants, these birds. What's it called? Cormorants. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. They're water birds.
Go underwater for a long time.
For a long time. Okay. Okay.
You can see them at the lagoon.
Oh, okay. I'll have to take.
They made the adventure to come here.
How about that? From all the way from Ireland. Okay. So and the book has a lot of humor. I love this character. Thematically, the book does deal with a very hard topic, and it deals with the sexual abuse by the priesthood in Ireland. very tough topic. However, and normally I'm a very sensitive reader and I wouldn't be able to read such a book, but the narrator, I just love him. And the writing is unbelievable. Um, and it's written in a stream of consciousness kind of way, very emotive. There is one scene that is especially difficult as he's recalling what his wife told him. They were both in orphanages. Yeah. So I mean, it wasn't easy, and because he's a policeman and he's telling the story, he's telling it with the forensic detail that a policeman would, and the author looked at you know, documents, and so these stories aren't really made up. But he felt that it's necessary to talk about it, to close it, not just because it's in the past, but because this is happening now too. Um, anyway, he's achieved a certain peace until these two younger policemen come to visit him, and they want to reopen a cold case that he had worked on. This is when the mystery element of the book begins. And it unfolds very gradually. Old God's Time is an expression meaning a time beyond memory, a fitting title for a book that deals with memory and its elusiveness. The book is not without light, however, or redemption. The narrator, who almost seems like an alter ego of the author, reflections on aging are laugh out loud funny. Also, his great love affair with his wife has served as a beacon for him. And in interviews, the author talks about his own wife in the same way, this great love that he has, and it's ongoing. And so from listening to his the interviews with him, I could see that in many ways he is the character of Bobcat. Well worth the read. It's just a gorgeous novel, and it's very thin. Just packs a lot, right? The second book I'm doing is called very different. This is called The Limits by Nell Reidenberg. And she's a literary writer. And she's dealing here with more of a family story. Now, just when we thought the pandemic was behind us, authors are now incorporating it into their novels. So reminding us of what we went through. So it's not quite in the rearview mirror, but enough for authors to start writing about it with some objectivity. So the Limits is set the first year of the pandemic, partly in New York and partly in Tahiti. So you get this, you know, beautiful island descriptions. You also get a lot of descriptions of the coral reefs that are in Tahiti, especially on this island called Maria in French Polynesia. I didn't realize it, but then when I was researching it, it's still, it's not a post-colonial, it's still under French control. Okay. Yeah, it still is. So the book is dealing with three different families. It's dealing with one blended family. One of the main characters is a renowned cardiologist, a fairly young man, and he is caught up in the first year of the pandemic in New York. And it reminds us of what they went through in New York in that first year. And of course, all he was doing was not cardiology, but he was needed in the intensive care unit to help these people and do what they can. The author in an interview talked about a friend of hers who was an intensive care doctor at that time. And she said that one of the most useful things she did is to try to find cell chargers for people because they were so limited. One testament to a writer's skill is how they highlight global themes with the mundane. In The Limits, Nell Freudenberger integrates science from questions posed by climate change to seafloor mining to the struggle of modern medicine at the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. The Limits revolves particularly around two women, the past and current lives of this prominent Manhattan cardiologist. The ex-wife, Natalie, is a French scientist studying coral at the Creole, a research station on the island of Maria in French Polynesia. These are actual really two organizations. As the book begins, she sends her daughter, 15-year-old Pia, in New York to live with her father, Stephen, and his new wife, Kate, who's a high school teacher in one of the disadvantaged communities in New York. So now the author is starting to show some of the social class issues that happened during the pandemic, because the cardiologist family is wealthy, and the wife teaches in a high school that's a more disadvantaged. The kids are, well, all of them were on remote, but she also has you take a look at one of the other families, one of the students of Kate, Athena. It has to do childcare for the house for her 4-year-old nephew, and work, and try to write her college entrance essays. So whereas Pia, she's kind of a spoiled 15-year-old. What the author does so well, she writes in the first person for each of the characters. And I thought what the 15-year-old wrote was very clever. You really get to know the mind of a 15-year-old girl who has a crush on somebody on the island who's 30, who right, and that's another reason her mother sent her to New York. So it was I really enjoyed the book. It tied global and personal things well. It was strongest when examining the complications of blended families. I also learned a lot about corals, and and how many are dying because of global warming. There was a story recently on NPR. Some scientists from one of these groups has successfully gotten hardier corals. Right? You heard the story too. They're working on that so that they don't die out. Those corals that can withstand the changing temperatures in the ocean. So if you're looking for literary fiction that examines modern families, this is a book you'd really enjoy.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning, yeah. It's morning somewhere, right? My first recommendation is the pensive and poetic novel, Museum of Failures by Thridi Umagar. This book came out in September of 2023, but it is worth a look if you haven't yet had the chance to read it. At the beginning of the novel, Rami Wadia travels from the US to his childhood homeland of India. He's not particularly fond of Bombay. The only bright spots Rami has of his childhood revolve around that of his doting father, who passed away 3 years previously. His motivation to travel stems from him and his wife's desire to adopt a child. A close friend has a niece who is pregnant and apparently open to adoption. Yet when Remy arrives, he quickly learns that the biological mother is now having second thoughts. Fearful that he and his wife may never be able to adopt, he must move on to the other reason for his time in Bombay, visiting his mother. Remy finds this task equally daunting, as his memories of his mercurial mother are full of scorn, indifference, and at times even abuse. For this reason, he did not keep in touch with her, and is therefore shocked to discover her condition has deteriorated considerably since the death of his beloved father. Overwhelmed by guilt, he stays to nurse his mother back to health. In the course of his stay, he learns a shameful secret that will change their relationship dramatically. Umrigar's character depictions are not always sympathetic. At times, even Remy, the main character, appears a bit self-involved. This story is one of flawed human beings, or at least very complex ones. Rather than detract from the novel, this creates an air of realism that makes the story all the more moving. Alternating between memories of the past and experiences of the present, Remy re-examines his ties not only to his mother, but to his father, wife, and even Bombay. Umrigar brings the city to life with her writing, and this additional character of sorts is just as memorable as the poignant family drama. This was actually something that I really liked about the book. Not just the whole slew of characters and how they were developed, but just how vibrant the city feels, and you kind of get transported there. For those who enjoy the fiction on family life and stories set in India, this heartfelt tale is not one to miss.
Good afternoon. Hello. I'm here to talk about When the Clock Broke by John Gans. In contrast to our current fraught moment, the 1990s are often viewed through a hazy lens of nostalgia as an era of prosperity and calm, an age defined by its sublime mediocrity, if not anything else. That memory is only half right, however, as documented in When the Clock Broke, Con Men, Conspiracists, and How America Cracked Up in the early 1990s, from John Gans, publisher of the Unpopular Front newsletter and one of the most perceptive political commentators working today. Gans recounts the other side of the 1990s, a decade which began with an almost euphoric optimism in the United States, brought on by a booming economy, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and an overwhelming military victory in the Gulf War. This outlook, however, turned out to be a mirage, as a painful recession and a raucous presidential election revealed a country overrun by what Gans terms politics of national despair. This is a politics that spanned the ideological divide, expressing itself, as Gans details, in the demagogic campaigns of David Duke, Pat Buchanan, Rudy Giuliani, and Ross Perot, in a talk radio landscape dominated by angry macho shock jocks like Rush Limbaugh, Don Imus, and Howard Stern, in a public pop culture landscape where films like JFK and Falling Down showed a combination of fury and resignation at a hopelessly corrupt political and social order, in a rapidly radicalizing far-right militia movement taking root across the country, and in the country's single biggest instance of public disorder since the Civil War, in the form of the 1992 LA riots. Gans weaves together these somewhat disparate events and trends to tell the story of a country that, as subtitle suggests, seemed to be cracking up, undergoing a national nervous breakdown. While the election of Bill Clinton, an economic boom that took hold in the middle of the decade, seemed to allay this anger, as our current political and cultural moment bears out, it certainly did not go away. A gifted prose stylist with a knack for finding just the right anecdote or statistic to back up his point, Gans has crafted a kind of prequel to Trump-era America, casting both the early 1990s and the present in an entirely new light. When the Clock Broke will be arriving at the Glencoe Public Library in hardcover on June 18th. Thank you.
All right. My first selection is Tripped, Nazi Germany, the CIA, and the Dawn of the Psychedelic Age by journalist Norman Ohler and translated from German by Martin Yarborough. This nonfiction book follows the story of lysergic acid dithylamide 25, more commonly known as LSD, or acid, from its creation in a Swiss laboratory to countercultural linchpin to its promising future in the fight against mental diseases and disorders. During the darkest days of World War II, something unusual happened in a laboratory in neutral Switzerland, just across the border from Nazi Germany. A chemist named Albert Hofmann synthesized a substance from ergot, a fungus native to the region. Accidental and later intentional ingestion resulted in novel sensations, thoughts, and visions. After the war, Hoffman's pharmaceutical company tested LSD as a treatment for psychosis. Results were so promising, they were taking the steps to seek FDA approval. But then the CIA got wind of LSD. They were worried that the Soviets would get to it first, use it as some sort of a truth serum or a mind control drug. What follows next is a true story of clandestine drug experimentation, a blossoming counterculture movement, and ultimately prohibition. LSD never really went away. It could reliably be found in the wake of Grateful Dead tours, for example, but only in recent years has it been reassessed as medicine. Research is very much in the early stages, but that preliminary research into treating addiction, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and even Alzheimer's is both promising and exciting. What I liked about this book is that it's a real roller coaster. There's a constant tug of war between various parties that are advocating for the free use of this mind-expanding substance and those who wish to use it for nefarious purposes, if not ban it outright. There's also a really great cast of larger-than-life characters, like Arthur Giuliani, the American agent who was waging his own war on drugs in post-war Berlin with the help of an ex-Gestapo officer. Timothy Leary, the Harvard professor who traded a button-down career in academia for a life of celebrity as an acid evangelist, and even the author's own mother, whose experiences microdosing with very small amounts of LSD had really remarkable effects on treating her Alzheimer's. The book is also an invitation to think about what could have been. Reading this book, I took a cue from John Lennon and just imagined. I kept on imagining a world where things turned out slightly differently. One where we have a new tool in the fight against degenerative mental diseases, and the war on drugs, with all of its associated waste and injustice, never had to happen. People who like to read countercultural literature or Cold War spy versus spy stories are going to like this one. It came out last month and is available from the Glencoe Library. And that does it for what's passed as prologue.
I have a question on that. Does the book touch on use, I believe, helpers given to German soldiers?
It doesn't, but his previous book is exclusively about that. It's called Blitzed, and it came out a few years ago. Blitzed is pretty much exclusively about that, and that's another really good read. We're now going on to the next section of our book news adventure. And my selection, or my first selection, is The Wide, Wide Sea, Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Final Fateful Voyage of Captain James Cook, a nonfiction book by historian Hampton Sides. You probably heard of Captain Cook, the 18th century English navigator who circumnavigated the globe twice and was the first European to lay eyes on Australia, New Zealand, and many other Pacific islands. This book follows his final voyage, which culminated with his murder in Hawaii. In 1776, King George III gave Cook orders for a third circumnavigation. 2 ships, the Discovery and the Resolution, were to sail to the Pacific and deposit a Polynesian man named Mai in Tahiti. Mai had joined Cook's crew on a previous voyage, sailed to England, and become the toast of town. But now it's time for this homesick celebrity with his unique life experience in both English and Polynesian culture to go back home. However, Cook also had secret orders from the king. He and his crew were to sail up the western coast of America and look for a back door to the fabled Northwest Passage. This voyage would take the crew to Africa, Oceania, North America, and Asia. But the crew noticed a change in the usually easygoing and open-minded Captain Cook. This time around, he was more likely to employ flogging as punishment on his own men, and engage in reprisals of hut burning and canoe smashing against the natives for perceived instances of theft. The voyage came to a climax in a stunning series of events on the big island of Hawaii. Cook went ashore where he was greeted as a god. Months later, Hawaiian warriors would murder him in the very same spot. When you read a book like this one that is so meticulously researched and well-written, you're going to learn a lot. Two things really stood out to me. The first was learning about the customs and culture of various Polynesian people. Many of them were accomplished seafarers and navigators, on par with the English despite their ancient techniques. The other was learning about Cook's complicated legacy. The ongoing reassessment of empire and colonialism has tarnished Cook's legacy, but perhaps undeservedly. Unlike so many figures in the age of exploration, Cook was never a conqueror, an enslaver, or a missionary. And while it's true these things did follow him with really ruinous consequences for the natives they encountered, first and foremost, Cook was just a brilliant navigator with the mind of a proto-anthropologist, a real product of the Enlightenment. So simply put, The Wide, Wide Sea is just first-rate historical nonfiction. It's perfect for readers who enjoy Eric Larson, Candace Millard, or David Grann. Maybe you were one of the people who last year read David Grann's The Wager, that true story of survival and treachery on the high seas and deserted islands. This one is even better. It came out last month. It is available from the library, so if you like those kinds of books, get on the hold list for it.
Right, my next book is Ghost Station, the new sci-fi horror chiller from author S.A. Barnes. Dr. Ophelia Bray is a psychiatrist who specializes in the study of Eckert-Reiser syndrome, or ERS. A result of excessive space travel, ERS can cause hallucinations and violent behaviors in its victims. Troubled by the recent suicide of one of her patients, Ophelia volunteers for duty aboard the Severin, an exploration ship which has recently lost one of its crew members to what Ophelia believes could be ERS. The hardscrabble crew of the Severin treats this outsider with disdain, a situation that only worsens when the ship comes across an abandoned outpost on a seemingly deserted alien planet. There are signs, however, of an ancient civilization on this planet, as well as a possible violent end to the outpost's previous human inhabitants. An end that may be in store for Ophelia and the crew of the Severin when the pilot turns up dead. Barnes is good at anything as an author is an atmosphere and world building. While the plot maneuvers and overall aesthetic may be familiar to anyone who has seen or enjoyed films like Alien or Event Horizon, the uncanny dread Barnes is able to conjure up makes for a terrifying slow burn of a read. As one might expect, the centrality of a syndrome that can cause hallucinations and violent paranoia to the plot also provides an opportunity for Barnes to introduce a sense of unease with the nature of reality that she exploits to its full effect. If easily startled, you may not want to read Ghost Station right before you go to bed. If any combination of horror, science fiction, space, or stories about psychological terror appeal to you, or you just have a fascination with things that go bump in the night, this is definitely a novel you do not want to miss. Ghost Station is available now at the Glencoe Public Library. Thank you.
All right, my final selection is The Secret History of Bigfoot, Field Notes on a North American Monster by John O'Connor. This nonfiction book is an exploration into the culture and mythology behind North America's favorite cryptid and the people who love him. First off, let me be clear. This is not a collection of stories about Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, encounters. It is not written to persuade you one way or another into the existence of Bigfoot. Rather than being about the what of Bigfoot, it's about the why of Bigfoot. Specifically, why do we, as humans, see monsters? Every culture on Earth has their own monster stories. And why do we, as contemporary Americans, see a 9-foot-tall hairy ape mosey through the woods of the Pacific Northwest? Journalist O'Connor hits the road in search of answers. He joins groups of Sasquatch trackers on moonlit walks in the woods. He meets cryptozoologists from Massachusetts to Oregon, everywhere in between, who run the gamut from citizen scientists employing the scientific method to what he calls woo-woo cranks with their own theories about UFOs and interdimensional rifts. It might amuse you to know that these two camps cannot stand each other. He learns about how many indigenous tribes of North America have their own wild man mythology, which closely lines up with the Bigfoot legend. And he talks to bird watchers who have their own stories of seeing strange things in the woods that nobody will believe. Woodpeckers, I'm talking about a certain species of woodpecker that they're seeing. So why do we see Bigfoot? According to O'Connor, the reasons have just as much to do with politics, economics, and conservation as they have to do with the human capacity for storytelling and cognitive biases that make the brain play tricks on its owner. The Secret History of Bigfoot is the kind of book that I adore. It takes an overlooked and admittedly ridiculous subject and gives it a philosophical treatment. At its heart, it's a road trip into America at its weirdest. But despite all the weirdness at hand, O'Connor takes an analytical and non-judgmental approach with his subjects, and the people he meets are nothing short of welcoming and enthusiastic. Plus, his descriptions of the forests and mountains of the Pacific Northwest are just stunning. This was a book that I read with my phone or laptop within an arm's reach away so I could look at pictures of the places he was talking about. So if you are a fan of travelogues, strange Americana, and mysteries that persist into the present day, and if you have a high tolerance for the ridiculous, The Secret History of Bigfoot is calling you. It came out in February and it's available from the library.
The pick I've chosen is A Flame in the North, an epic fantasy by Lilith St. Croix. In A Flame in the North, Solve, a mage with unique elemental magic, finds herself on a dangerous journey. On the longest night of the year, a sacred occasion that also acts as a rite of passage for Solve, her brother murders a member of another clan. As is custom for this crime, the Northern clan insists on taking a weregild, which is a kind of hostage guest situation, for a year and a day. They will only accept Solve in this role, and so she must leave her beloved home behind with only her shield maid Arn as protection. As they travel north with their captors, it becomes clear that all is not as it seems. There are whispers of a great evil rising in the north, an evil that the southern clans dismissed as destroyed. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Solve has an important part to play in protecting the lands she holds dear. In this tale, Solve and Arn fight to survive monsters, vicious Urukar, and a frigid, unforgiving winter. Yet, as much as the story contains moments of danger, it also holds moments of wonder and warmth. Solve encounters entirely new civilizations of near immortals and even an odd dwarf who live in mystical and enchanting surroundings. Passages about family, friends, and allies are depicted with care. Whatever relationships and settings Solve finds precious, readers will too. St. Croix brings these various tableaus to life with vivid and at times captivating descriptions. Her formal prose adds to the otherworldly atmosphere, and its unhurried style contributes to the story feeling even more like an epic journey. Something that I find refreshing compared to a lot of contemporary prose is like she takes her time. She's not boring, but you really get to get a feel for the place that the characters occupy. With strong female characters, themes of honor and loyalty, and elements of Norse mythology, A Flame in the North is a satisfying adventure. A Flame in the North is currently on order here and is the first volume in a trilogy. The second entry in the series, The Fall of Waterstone, will be released in June. This marks the end of our adventure section, and we're going to move on now to the arts and culture section.
All right, my final book is The World Is Yours, The Story of Scarface by Glenn Kenny. As one of, if not the most iconic gangster film of all time, 1983 Scarface has acquired a mythic stature in our cultural imagination. So much so that it can be hard to remember that Al Pacino's Tony Montana, that before Al Pacino's Tony Montana was on t-shirts, featured in music videos, and on amateur paintings seen in Italian restaurants. He was an actual character in an actual film. That actual film, a very, very loose remake of 1932 film set in Chicago, directed by Howard Hawks, is the subject of a new book from film critic Glenn Kenny. Kenny, the author of Made Men, a detailed look at the making of another classic gangster film, Goodfellas, which I recommend reading if you haven't, brings the same copious amount of research and narrative verve to The World Is Yours. Learn, for instance, how Scarface was originally supposed to be directed by Sidney Lumet of Dog Day Afternoon and Serpico fame, and was going to be an overtly political drama about the Reagan administration's involvement in drug trafficking. How the eventual director, Brian De Palma, had to fight the ratings board tooth and nail to avoid an X rating for a film which broke new ground in terms of screen depictions of violence and sexuality. Learn why perhaps the most famous film associated with the city of Miami was forced to actually be shot in Los Angeles. And which famous filmmaker, who just happened to be visiting De Palma on the set that day, ended up directing the famous Manson shootout scene, which serves the film's climax. In addition to penning a great behind-the-scenes chronicle of a classic film, Kenny also proves to be an adept analyst of the film Curious and Unintended Afterlife as a profound influence on the aesthetics of early hip-hop. Whether you've seen the film 30 times, it's been 30 years since you've seen it, or you've never had the pleasure of experiencing the violent, decadent world of Tony Montana on the big screen, you will enjoy this entertaining account of the creation and impact of a standard of American cinema. The World Is Yours will be available at the Glencoe Public Library this Tuesday, May 7th, so put yourself on the hold list if you haven't already. Thank you.
My culture and arts pick, which I think has an absolutely gorgeous cover, by the way, is Anita de Monte Laughs Last by New York Times bestselling author Xochitl Gonzalez. Anita de Monte Laughs Last switches between two parallel narratives. The first takes place in the 1980s and focuses on Anita de Monte, a larger-than-life Cuban-American artist who is trying to not only step out of the shadow of her controlling and famous husband, Jack Martin, but make it in an art world that is incredibly white and male-centric. She's my personal favorite in the story. She's brash, she's passionate, there's mystical qualities to her, and she's just a lot of fun to read. Her work, however, is cut short when she dies under mysterious, or perhaps not so mysterious, circumstances. The second narrative occurs in the 90s and revolves around Raquel Toro, an ambitious Puerto Rican art history student at Brown University. As a Latina from a working-class background at an elite college, Raquel feels pressures to assimilate. This drives her decision to write her thesis on her professor's favorite artist, none other than Jack Martin. She also finds herself in a relationship with a rich white artist whose behaviors are increasingly suspect. This mirroring narrative structure keeps the pages turning as the reader wonders about the exact nature of Anita's death, whether Raquel will be subject to a similar fate, and to what extent their narratives intertwine. Gonzalez succeeds at eliciting a wide range of affects, from humor to heartbreak. She manages to lighten serious explorations of racism and misogyny with clever and irreverent prose, as well as elements of the fantastical. As much as this novel is a meditation on race, class, and gender, it is also a meditation on what constitutes art, leaving the reader with much to ponder. Anita de Monte Laughs Last was inspired by the mysterious death of real-life artist Ana Mendieta, which adds an additional layer of intrigue to the novel. And should you choose to select this pick, I took a look at some of her artwork as well as her husband's, and it does indeed mirror or inspired the way that the artists in the book's artwork was. So that was really fascinating. This novel is for art lovers, those who like their literary fiction with a dash of drama and surrealism, and those who like their characters well drawn. Read to find out how, despite her death, Anita does indeed have the last laugh. Thank you all so much for coming to Book News. This marks the end of our session, and feel free to put books on hold.